You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're joined by Jannet Walker-Ford, National Transit and Rail Leader at WSP. We chat about high-speed rail around the country, escalating project costs, and our current transportation policy environment. Stay with us. Today's podcast is brought to you by our super generous Patreon supporters. Thanks so much for supporting the show. We really appreciate it. To join this merry band of infrastructure nerds and zoning wizards, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month gets you stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month gets you one of our bus-only scarves. The fall is almost here, so get one to warm your transit-loving heart today. Go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. Today's podcast is also brought to you by the projects of the Overhead Wire, including our 15-year-old Daily Cities newsletter, read around the world. We pull the best news about cities from around the web and share them with readers each morning. It's the best newsletter in the business, so try us out for free by going to theoverheadwire.com. You'll also find links to buy the scarf as well as our audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic Town Planning in Practice. Go to theoverheadwire.com to find out more. Well, Jannet Walker-Ford, welcome to the Talking Headways podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. It's a privilege to be with you today.
Well, thanks for being here. Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I run the National Transit and Rail business for WSP USA. We're a global firm, though, and provide services all over the world. And we are infrastructure and engineering based in terms of our expertise and capabilities. And one might ask, what does it mean to run a transit and rail business? So my team and I focus on not just ensuring that we're delivering for our current clients, and those are agencies that are transit agencies in the public sector, as well as those such as Amtrak and that sort of thing, but also thinking about the future. So we're developing strategies around growth and innovation, and especially areas, whether it be electrification or other signs of innovation like automation. So we focus on not just today, but the forward-looking strategies to meet our client needs.
How did you get into transportation? What was your first inkling that you wanted to focus on transit, focus on the topics that you do? Was it when you were a little kid or was it when you got older? How did that happen?
It's really a great question. It's something I think that we within the industry ask each other all the time. Did you plan to do this or did you fall into it? And I was the latter, where I did not plan to get into this business. My background is information technology. I started out, though, as a poli-sci major, a political science major, going through school, and then got into, in looking at innovation in the future, I was exposed to information technology in a very interesting way at an early age. That was actually my entree after going through .coms and IT skills and that kind of thing, programming, project management. I was introduced to transit specifically in my days when living in Atlanta, Georgia. And I candidly had no idea that transportation systems were built on technology. They are the backbone of any of those systems, whether it's train control systems or CAT-AVL systems, automated systems, that sort of thing. So I got in through my IT roots in Atlanta. I was consulting initially. I later became the Chief Information Officer for that system in Atlanta, the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, and later the Deputy CEO. But my entree was information technology, and that continues to be the foundation of the way that I've let's say, maneuvered my career is through IT.
Did you get to use any of those poli-sci lessons lately as well?
Yes, because, and this already, this business is based on relationships and the understanding of the needs of the local community, and then being able to affect change through influence and building collaboration and consensus around decisions related to infrastructure, related to public transportation. And one of the things that is oftentimes most challenging in this space is priorities. There are different priorities for different communities or different needs, or, one community, which goes first in terms of which community gets a particular service first versus other, when you have sometimes limited funding or competing funds. So I think that the poli-sci skills absolutely help me as it relates to being able to to argue, if you will, or advocate for a position that benefits the general public.
You mentioned you'd worked for a number of firms. You worked for MARTA, a number of transit agencies. I'm curious what your favorite project was in all those places that you've been.
Oh, wow. I was just having to answer something very similar a little bit earlier today in terms of the favorite projects. But I would say my favorite project is back at MARTA because I was on the public sector side, as you know, and I've also been for the rest of my career for the last 20 years on the private sector side. But MARTA, and the reason goes back to your question around using my poli-sci experience. It was delivering as the chief information officer and then later the deputy CEO, the first all smart card system in North America. And that's the smart card fare payment system. We branded it the Breeze because we wanted to simulate the idea of breezing through the system, whether you were coming from a suburban area or moving around within the city of Atlanta and its jurisdictions. So we rebranded the system, which in itself was really an activity that tried to promote ridership and all the things that are important, such as safety, on-time performance, and those sort of things, reliability. But also it was a project that was multimodal, right? So other counties, other bus agencies had to participate in there, but it really provided a much more seamless way of traveling and paying to ride the system using we're now talking about using apps and phone devices, but at that time it was using a smart card to go through the system, whether you're riding in the city of Atlanta or Cobb County or DeKalb County. And that project, I went from a manual system where we were using, if you use turnstiles going through, I think back in, you probably have seen turnstiles back in your past, but going from turnstiles to gates that open when you approach them, going away from tokens and token vending machines to, again, using really cashless and credit card options, though cash still exists, but having to go through that space. So it was a huge change management in the way that the riders use the system, the way that the agency managed the system, and the way that we interacted with the customers in terms of customer service and their ability to do some self-service options. That project was a complicated one because it was the first of its kind in terms of technology. So we learned a lot with that, but also it was transformational in the way that MARTA was providing, their services to the customer, and it broadened the regions in a much more efficient manner.
It's so advanced now. I saw, I think it was yesterday or the day before on CNN, there was an article about, I think it was Austria, who'd created a climate card basically. And for €250 or €350 a day, you can buy an annual pass. It's like €1,300 or something like that. So for €350 a day, you can go anywhere in the country on any vehicle, whether it's an intercity train, a bus, a subway, anything, and you can just have one pass and it'll take care of everything. I hope we get to that. I mean, obviously starting out at MARTA and with the Breeze card and everything like that is very innovative at the time, but now we can do all this other stuff, which is amazing. And I hope we can get to that.
Oh, you're spot on. And I am so jealous because of some of the other countries, cities that are able to advance a bit more. I mean, we are now, though, at the stage where we are using apps to pay for public transportation. So it's the app that's right in your hand, and we're using that in a way that allows users to not only pay, but to understand what their options are for travel. So many of our clients and many of our cities and agencies are already utilizing technology, Apple Pay, and we're using Google, all of that to be able to have payment options, but it's using real-time information that's available through these systems, along with a payment platform, and then the options. There you go. You got it with Clipper. The options that we have before us, I think, and I have a little bit of history with Clipper, by the way, but I think
probably
that
better than this.
you know exactly where we've been, and so the next phase is not only being able to, and Clipper, that app is available now as well. So we make sure we're addressing equity, everything that we do as well. So for the unbanked, we have to have solutions, but where we're really at the forefront now is saying, let's take all these disparate types of travel options available to us, whether it's the TNCs with the Uber that started right there in San Francisco, Uber, a Lyft, electric scooter, public transportation, parking, and tolling. And we are working on providing them, when I say we, the industry, a way of having all that seamless travel at the tips of a user. And I love the term mobility as a service, mobility integration, because it absolutely looks at all those options, all those modes that a user might use to get to. And depending on what your preferences are, as well as your financial means, you may choose to do a trip that's the shortest route. It may be the most expensive expensive, or you may choose to do two transfers. It's, maybe you're a college student, it may take you a bit longer, but you've got that option at hand. So having the type of technology and innovation that's at your hands is really important. At WSP, what I'm excited about is that we offer those modes of service within the transportation business line, whether it be tolling, whether it's highways and transit, that we can put that all together for our clients. But I think that is really where we're going in the future. It's what we're working on now, and that will make a difference in, I think, efficiency for clients. You mentioned earlier, post-pandemic, what are they looking for? I think we're looking for more options around ease of use, efficiency, and reliability. And all these systems help us get there.
For sure. You're also on a number of boards, WTS, APTA. What's the most beneficial thing these trade and research groups do for furthering the cause of transit and active transportation more generally?
I think in general, a simple way of putting it is that they all provide a voice for public transportation, different perspectives as in terms of their slice of what they're looking at. APTA looking at public transit primarily, but a research arm, but they all are about advocacy for public transportation, but kind of advocacy for funding as well as support for those agencies. So they are a voice for our industry. So I think that's probably the most beneficial thing. Obviously, they all have a big presence in DC, which is where legislators are, and they're making those decisions. But it's I say advocacy, but an educational process as well. Why is it important that you have abilities for transit agencies to extend their bus rapid transit, automation, autonomous vehicles, construction, or as it relates to, we know the infrastructure conversation as relates to, if I go outside of transit, that holistic picture. But these agencies, because focuses on, as well as TRB, all modes of transportation, whereas APTA is more focused on transit. But all of them, I think, have very similar objectives in advocating for the public transit agencies. What I like best about them is the fact that they are that common voice that understands the needs across the agency, whether it be a small, medium, or large agency. All those things are in mind as they're advocating. The thought leadership that comes, and we've got an APTA conference that's happening just next week in Orlando. It'll be the first APTA Expo. It's their annual conference, Transform Conference and Expo. It'll be the first one since the pandemic in Orlando, starting in just about a week or so. And what I like best, besides the advocacy piece, is the thought leadership that you see and hear at these conferences, and the opportunity for public and private sector to come together and really explore ideas around advancing public transportation, where they're having similar challenges as well as where they've had great successes. These forums to share that information are really important, as well as the networking that goes into it. So we're seeing, the best of the best in terms of technical excellency, as well as thought leadership and innovation.
How do you have time for all these boards? Doing my job is just hard enough. You're on these boards and all these things.
It's a good question, but these boards play hand in hand with my role and our role in this industry. I mean, if I'm sitting behind a desk or sitting at home, something's wrong. Really, the important part of being able to be successful in my role and in our roles is interfacing with our customers, and that's the customers at every level. So our customers in terms of the agencies, but also with the users of the system, the riders of the system, who are also part of, these environments. The other thing that happens with these boards, if I get away from just the advocacy part of it and get away for a little bit away from the innovation and thought leadership, there's a significant amount of networking and mentoring and development of our future workforces the workforce that happens at these conferences. If I pick on WTS, the Women's Transportation Seminar, we're all about advancing women in transportation. Very underrepresented in the industry, and we've got to do more. So this organization is very much focused on, as I'm chair of the foundation board, that 12 to 18 age group, and providing them with role models and really education around public transportation. And then the existing, under WTS International, those are the existing professionals, and we're providing them with ongoing development and networking opportunities to further their careers. So these are very important roles that we have in these boards in terms of board roles and organizational roles. And I will say I'm the incoming chair for the WTS International organization, which I'm really excited about. But all of them, just to kind of close the loop on this, go back into our voice and advocacy for this industry from a funding perspective and a priority perspective. All of that matters in terms of packaging the impact.
Yeah, I think we've missed out on conferences over the last year and a half or so that we haven't been able to attend live. I mean, we have the video conferences and we can talk to people as we are right now through our computers, but it's just not quite the same. It's not quite the same, like you mentioned networking and all that stuff. And I'm looking forward to kind of getting back. I don't think I'm going to be back this year, but maybe next year probably we'll get back into the groove of going to conferences and seeing people and all that stuff.
Oh, you haven't done that just yet. I understand. Yeah.
No, I can't. Airplanes, I don't know yet. I don't know about the airplanes yet. Well, let's talk a little bit about the infrastructure bill and what I call the Gang of 10 infrastructure bill. I've been frustrated by it generally, I think, because we're given such a high bar and then it kind of gets cut down over time. And, what's been happening, kind of this compromise, as it were, the centrism of it. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the bill and the process and maybe what's in it.
I'm really excited about the bill. I mean, I think I share with some enthusiasm that I'm hearing from you, but also a little bit of disappointment that we're not able to, we're ready to go on this. And I'm so excited about what's in the bill. And so it's historical in terms of what's being proposed from an equity and infrastructure perspective, much needed priorities. And perhaps, in our lifetime, the most investment that we've seen put forward for our industry and infrastructure. I'm thrilled to see the conversation around equity, and that's everything from transportation to water and the environmental aspects of it. I think that's really critical. And I think that the only way that we'll get the investment and the priorities that we're hearing about around equity, particularly, is if it is a funding incentive for it. So I believe we will see funding investment. I'm excited about what's happening with Amtrak, which is critical. Need that funding in the Northeast Corridor, but the funding that we're seeing across the entire United States for the Amtrak corridors, I think is really, really critical and much needed. And I'm excited about that. And I hope that that particular funding level continues to stay there, as well as what we're seeing for funding for rail. I believe the number still is around $66 billion. We want to see that dedicated funding as well continue there, and the funding for freight. So good stuff. I like the idea that we're looking at not just what we want to do from the start, but also going back. You got to go back and see what inequities were there before, what projects were not put to the forefront, and make sure those get considered. So I'm really excited about it, and I'm optimistic that we will see we will see an infrastructure bill come across very soon.
Yeah, I think some of it's good. I think some of the discussions are good. I think I might echo some of what one of my colleagues, Beth Osborne, says, in that, it's frustrating from a standpoint of where we like to give out money. We like to write bills that write small pieces for some of these structural things that are going on. For example, there was $10 billion for the Reconnecting Neighborhoods initiative, which would reconnect neighborhoods that were cut apart by freeways historically. But now there's only $1 billion. But that's just like a small part of the bill. And it's not kind of tied into the larger discussion of $350 or $250 billion for highways generally, or for roads generally. And so that kind of policy connection feels a little bit, it's a big leap forward, but at the same time, as somebody who looks at the policy and the stuff every day, it feels like maybe it's a baby step instead of maybe a big step.
No, I totally agree with you. And as we continue to see it slim down more and more, right, I guess slim down is a good word for it. It's a bit disappointing because we're hoping to make a greater impact right away. But the point that you're making around reconnecting communities, which was a essential part of this bill coming in, I think still elements there. I believe clearly that's exactly what we need to do, whether it was a bridge or whether it was a railroad. There are all these things historically that have segmented or fragmented our communities from past decision making. So being able to go back and readdress those priorities is really important. The other thing is too, where there's communities. We saw that in San Francisco with the Central Subway expansion, how it's kind of providing a rail alternative versus just bus in Chinatown as an example, right? These are things where communities have been waiting for a long time for an alternate type of transportation, alternate to bus that perhaps was faster and more efficient. They've been waiting a long time, and I know that there are projects still going on in the Bay Area, but all around the country, there's inequities as to decision makings about the type of transportation or transit technologies that they get to see. So I would hope that we were able to see some of that monies go back to making good on those commitments from the past.
It's interesting you mentioned the Central Subway, because that can be like a sore spot here from a transit advocacy from the nerds, right? I guess I'd consider myself a nerd. Just the way it was constructed and the way it was put together and the expense of it, the $1.6 billion per mile. I think it's a really necessary connection, and I appreciate the connection to Chinatown. It was also a political deal brokered between Rose Pack and Willie Brown at the time after the earthquake, because the Chinatown merchants didn't want the Embarcadero Freeway to come down, because that was their kind of their lifeline, they felt, for transportation. But it also kind of gets into all the minutia of these projects. Like if we look at it from a 30,000 foot kind of vantage point, we can see that there's all these projects that are going on in there and they seem very valuable. But then when you get down to the details of it, it took so long to build the project. The project might not be as good as we wanted it to be. There's only 2-car trains in the tunnel. It didn't go down Geary, which was one of the initial discussions. One of our most frequent bus services on Geary, but also we're looking for a subway in the future. And so that connection wasn't made at the time. So it's interesting that you brought that project up, because I obviously have a lot of opinions on it here in the Bay Area. But it also gets to that project cost question. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on just general project. I know Eno's working on this, but project costs, they're kind of escalating and going up, when in other countries we're seeing costs maybe not as expensive to do maybe similar projects.
Yeah, as it relates to the details that you just mentioned, I'm not as familiar with those. I think I pick up on Central Subway if I go there for a second because of the equity part of it, thinking about 2021 and the equity piece and that intent to serve the community. I think in terms of project cost, we're seeing a variety of different types of project delivery methods and mechanisms in the United States. So I think there is some accuracy in terms of the different models, the different models that we see, and the different, let's say, labor costs and labor models here in the United States.
I find it interesting. Have you been following kind of what Eno's been doing? I know they had a conference last week about the project cost stuff. I hope that at some point we'll get to talk with them in more detail about it. But I'm curious if you've been following along with the more general discussion about the project costs and how to lower them. There's a number of different organizations, it feels like, that are trying to tackle this question.
Sure. And I am on the Eno board. I'm proud to say I did not have a chance to participate in the great sessions that they had last week, but always a thought leader, and they do a terrific job. And APTA does the same thing about looking at different delivery construction models, the project costs, which ones are more cost effective, the procurement strategies and that sort of thing. So I think it's absolutely great news that we're looking at it from that lens. And we've got great organizations like that can kind of do better research and do some comparisons for the industry, and then help us, where need be, help the industry be able to deliver. You're always striving to get to a better on-time delivery model and better and improved cost. It's decision making, it's funding, it's timing, a whole host of things.
What do you think the larger construction companies like WSP, what do you think their role is in trying to lower construction costs and trying to maybe lower construction costs so we can get more projects?
That's a really great question, and there's many answers to that. But our role, one of the roles clearly, is serving as that trusted advisor to our clients, which I think we do incredibly well, and being in early and identifying what the needs of the customer are, with the region, I say the region, what are those needs, and being able to help define those early on. I mean, we know that the longer you wait sometimes to deliver projects, the costs go up. So being able to understand what those needs are early on, we do, I think, an excellent job of being able to work closely with our customers, whether it be in a trusted advisor capacity or working with them, early on with our expertise and defining those requirements and being part of that design process. So we enjoy a relationship with our customers and doing just that. And I think being able to get that right as it relates to the procurement, the RFP, the types of procurement methods and methodologies that are used. We spend a lot of time with our clients talking about the pros and cons of the different methods that are available to them. So I think that where we can be most impactful is early on, and then making sure that we've got the right team of partners that are assembled to deliver the project, and the ways that we really communicate and status the customer throughout the entire project. It's important to ensure that we've got timing and decision making. The funding is in place. I mean, it's all those things, as you know, that go into being able to deliver a project at a timeline that's been committed. Is having the right people at the table at the right time and the right buy-in, particularly the community, is always a critical part of it. And the more they can be upfront in the process, the better the results are as well.
Yeah, I think that's part of it too, is I guess I'll include myself in the community more generally, because I think a lot of the projects that we've built in the last couple of decades, and maybe even the last 30 years or so after, I guess after the San Diego light rail line in 1981 and the advent of the New Starts process and all that, I feel like we've done kind of a bad job at planning corridors and lines and those types of things. And so I guess it's on us to a certain extent, but then it's interesting to think about what the roles of all the companies, what the roles are for the cities and the decision makers and even the community that wants the line not to go through a certain part of town or wants it to go through another part, or whether it's a subway or above ground, those types of things. And it could get frustrating, I think, from an activist standpoint. I wrote my master's thesis on the politics of light rail in Austin, going back to 1975.
Yes.
And it's very, very frustrating, voting in 2000, going back to voters in 2004 for a completely different line that did a whole different thing and connected a whole different part of town, which has now been rectified by the most recent election. But it's just, that process is multi-layered. It's very complicated. And then have companies like yours that are in the mix. And it's interesting to think about all the things that have to go into planning and thinking about projects.
And that's really true. And I think the other thing, and it related to what you're saying too, is, sometimes you go in, I think in the past, pretty much maybe as a country, we went in with the solution already in first. You knew what you wanted, and then you try to go back into defining the requirements. Now we've got so much innovation that we realize, and options. I mentioned rail alternatives. So whether it's BRT or whether it's a light rail or whether it's rail or whether it's micro transit, there's not one size fits all. And, you don't need a 40-foot bus necessarily in every corridor. So being able to look holistically the various options to provide first mile, last mile transportation solution is really important, and being able to educate the community, the advocates, about the pros and cons of them so they don't feel like they got shortchanged is something that's really important to do. And that's something that, as we talk about what our roles are early on, we're able to do that. We've got an outstanding planning group of folks with expertise that really spend the time in the space that you're just talking about, doing just that, looking at what those alternatives are and making sure that not only are we designing for the need right now, to your point, but what is the need going to be in 5 years and 10 years as we're talking about, autonomous vehicles and, we're electrification and those sort of things. So we really have, I think, a responsibility, WSP and the industry, to help educate our customers and with leadership and being out front and looking at the future. One of the things, if we can stay in California, you just mentioned, some projects back in, I believe you were saying Los Angeles. One of the things that, it really embodies what I'm describing in terms of our role is the project that we are working with LA Metro. I mean, not LA Metro, but California HighSpeed Rail. And I'm sure you're pretty familiar with that, but we are the rail delivery partner and we're excited about this, for the first high-speed rail system planned for implementation in the US. And it's developed new standards for high-speed rail in the country. And we're proud to have been part of that with high-speed rail. Our role specifically there is for moving the California high-speed rail project from the really early phases of design to future operation. And so we've been involved as early as the feasibility studies and preliminary engineering to develop information that was beneficial in the passage of the $10 billion statewide bond and establishing the state's first high-speed technical rail requirements and standards. So these are, that's just a specific example that I wanted to provide you that I think answers your question about the kinds of ways that we interact or we support our customers in advancing projects.
Yeah, we had Boris Lipkin of the High-Speed Rail Authority on recently to talk about the EIS for the segment between San Jose and the Central Valley, which is a really important segment for us, obviously, to get on between those mountain ranges between the Central Valley and the Bay Area so we can get it into San Francisco so that I can take the train to visit my sister in Bakersfield. It's an interesting discussion about, how we get there, but also, the politics of it, the legislators in Los Angeles who are kind of sandbagging a little bit on it because they want more of the money to go to local operations. And I know that's not in your wheelhouse necessarily, but there's a lot of discussion about the line and how it works. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on kind of the general state of high-speed rail in the country. I mean, we know that it's kind of got its fits and starts because of different administration changes. And obviously, the previous administration didn't like these types of investments. The conservative Central Valley Republicans kind of wanted to block it as much as possible, even though it went through their neighborhoods and would probably benefit them a lot. It's interesting to think about it from a political standpoint, but I'm curious what your thoughts are generally on the state of high-speed rail, what's going on in Texas, what's going on in California, the Northeast Corridor, et cetera.
I'm more excited than ever, optimistically, about high-speed rail in our country. And you referenced a little bit ago, about what you've seen in other countries and whether it's how they pay the fares. And I'm sure you implied how the system is used. I'm jealous, envious of the fact that we have more than that. It's not like, it's not just like breathing. I do believe that we are now at a time where that recognition is there. Very excited about what's happening in California. We're going to get there. And obviously, Texas has made great headway. We're seeing more private and public partnerships as it relates to these projects. And you can look at Florida for what we're doing, what's happening in Florida as it relates to commuter rail or high-speed rail hybrid with All Aboard Florida that has gone from Miami, planned opening in Orlando, that will get folks quickly, swiftly, whether you're getting off a cruise ship and you want to go to Walt Disney World for the day, or you're just going to Orlando today, suddenly you're going to have very, very soon an opportunity to do that. And there's additional discussions about expanding beyond that. So that, whether it's the private sector in partnership with the public sector that's making that happen, because there's a connectivity that's in mind for that. Same thing is happening on the West Coast. It's Los Angeles to Las Vegas, I believe, is that look-see. All of those, as well as the state-run high-speed rail projects, are part of this solution. And I believe the continued investment and priorities, and let's just say the C word, collaboration, at the state and local federal level, that's starting to gel more and more, and it's happening. And I'm optimistic that we're going to see that continue. And we're excited to be part of those projects that you're calling off, whether it be Texas high-speed rail or whether it be in California.
I have a larger policy discussion question for you. What are we missing from our national conversation? We talked about the infrastructure bill and all that stuff, but from a policy perspective, as it relates to transit and rail,
yes,
new starts, all those things, I'm curious, what do you think we're missing?
Well, I like this question. I'm a bit opinionated about this particular question about what.
That's good.
Right, right. This is what you want outside of the funding discussion and the policy, the perspectives that you were putting aside for a moment. This is still, it's a funding and policy related response. And that is stepping back and looking holistically across all the modes. I feel like right now we've got funding that comes out for each mode. And so you almost are in a situation where there's a competition starting to emerge more and more as the lines get blurred between what's considered a transit and rail funding need and what's a highway need and what's let's say, any other needs. And I think that there has to be, and I think it should be at the federal level, an incentive for there to be more collaboration across modes at the state and local level that say, let's look at a project that connects, like you described a few minutes ago. How do you connect, though, all the pieces that you need to ultimately make it an end-to-end type of commute, or get you your last mile, first mile? So that means, to me, if I use an example, looking at congestion and congestion management and mitigation. We're all trying to solve that, but it looks like it's being solved by one mode at a time. We're going to build either, I'm all for building more highways and more roadways, or we're going to build or try to extend our transit lines. But at the end of the day, we have to understand what creates congestion on our roads and our highways. And then if you take a look and you just do an inventory, you say, okay, we've got freight, which we want to move, but freight that oftentimes will move through corridors and move through cities, states, and gets right in the middle of the same traffic as a automobile and public transit. So you have to say, how do you look at what's creating congestion and then incentivize behaviors a bit differently? And that means that, and this goes to funding then, right? But that means that when freight comes into ports and then it leaves the ports, whether it be through rail or whether it be through a trucking mechanism, understanding how that flows and how long it takes to get through a particular city or state. And then say, well, okay, that's causing congestion. One person per vehicle is causing congestion. Even our TNCs, they're adding one person per vehicle that's adding to congestions in a certain way. So if we look at then again, having people travel at different times to go to the football game, when there's, it seems like we do really well when there is an Olympics, and sometimes a crisis, we get our heads together and we collaborate about how to, move people around. That should be a permanent, sustainable solution in my mind. So if there is a congestion management strategy or platform that is real time, so that, Jeff, before you leave your house, you can look at your app and your phone and if I leave right now, it will take me an hour to leave. If I wait 30 minutes, it will take me 15 minutes to get there. And so you're able to change your travel patterns, or your travel patterns are altered real time because you've got information at your fingertips. So I think creating a mechanism, a platform for sharing of data, big data, business intelligence across all modes, again, freight, transit and rail, the roads, so that's the DOTs, that sort of thing. I think that's what's missing, is an integrated conversation around the transportation industry. And when I say conversation, tool, platform.
Do you think it's missing because we don't really have a national goal of any kind? It's more like, it feels like, and I've talked about this in the show a number of times, but it feels like we're just in the business of giving out money for formula funds, right? There's no real goal or larger end game to reach. I mean, you mentioned congestion. DeFazio in the Invest Act mentioned access. There's a discussion about that going on. But it seems like we've never really been able to write into policy those overarching goals that might lead to a more integrated system that you're talking about.
Yeah, I actually start to see more of that language in Chairman DeFazio, some of his most recent markups. I've seen more focus on, if you've looked at it, and I read into it, this is my interpretation, more focus on that congestion management component that does get to the end game, because I think it takes a nod to recognize what I just described. And that's even going, if you think about even the rural areas that may not have the same type of congestion or issues. I mean, there ultimately is a piece of this discussion for everyone. But I do think it takes a look at incentivizing, right? Not penalizing, but incentivizing solutions across modes to address this. So I think it is there. And I think that the other thing is, where you say you don't think there's a goal, I think there are goals, but they are siloed goals, in my opinion. They're trying to get to commitments and promises that have made to the taxpayers, oftentimes through referendums or commitments to sales tax or property tax, but knitting that together for a cohesive solution is still what I think is missing.
A bit of a more lighthearted question. What's your favorite transit line?
Oh, gosh. Now you're going to get me in trouble with that. No, I cannot answer that question.
Do you have a collection of transit lines that you like?
I have a collection of transit lines. I lead a national business for WSP USA.
I got to give you a hard time,
All of their lines are my favorite lines.
Not even one from when you were younger? Or I used to take the number 1 bus in Austin from my apartment to the University of Texas, and that might be, just from a memory standpoint, maybe that's probably my favorite. So I'm curious if you have something like that, maybe.
Oh, and that's such a great experience. I think I would tip my hand if I tell you my favorite one, because it happens to be something that's in my recent past as well. So I won't, but I am excited about what's happening in Austin, very much so. And as we talk about what a plan looks like and the goals that they have there for commitment to a longer term sustainable transportation strategy, it's pretty fascinating, pretty excited, very happy for the folks over at Cap Metro and ATP.
I guess this is my last question, and it's a little bit more complicated. So recently there was a Washington Post article about AASHTO, and they're awarding a highway project an award for livability and for sustainability, which I think got a lot of folks up on my end of the pond a little bit frustrated and upset. And then there, in the article, it had kind of a versus discussion between NACTO, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and AASHTO, which is National Road Association, basically. Mm-hmm. I can't remember the exact acronyms. There's too many of them in our business. Maybe we can cut that down in some form or fashion. But I'm curious, the framing around the article was about kind of a next generation coming up, changing the discussion about transportation. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the next generation and what they'll be expecting out of their transportation experience.
Well, and I actually happen to be at the AASHTO conference as we speak. I'm very excited about the incoming chair, Secretary Sean Wilson from Louisiana. So I think he takes the gavel tomorrow. Very exciting. In terms of answering your question about the future, this generation is, as we all know, it was, and certainly before the pandemic, it's probably that way now as well. it's just amazing that they weren't racing to get the driver's license like we did. We had our permit at 15, and by 16, we had that driver's license. This generation wants public transportation. They want to be in cities where they're walkable, accessible. It's having options, multiple options. So one size does not fit all. They are embracing technology and innovation. So whether that's the autonomous vehicles, which we know in different forms is happening as we speak. They will want to have, and not too different from what we're looking for now, but they expect it versus, we want it. They expect it, right? They're expecting to have versatility in the type of transportation options that they have. They're wanting it to be on time. They want it to be clean and available. Not too different from what we want, but they do want that. And they want to get to that first mile, last mile, and they want options to do that. So I think the future is very bright, and what they're expecting is not too, in some ways different from what we're looking, except that the fact that they want it when it's most convenient for them.
Jannet, where can folks find more information about your work online?
Sure. I would begin by referring folks to go to www.wsp.com. Listed there, it's our USA business is listed there. And then the types of, obviously, I'm going to start with the transit and rail business. There is a full listing of the type of services and capabilities that we have there, along with our client base. And then the full breadth of our transportation business is also laid out there. My email address is there, along with my colleagues that run the other parts of the business, whether it be the highway bridge, the tolling business, and others. You can find that all there. And then if you want to know more about WSP USA and our breadth of responsibilities across our business lines, that information is there. And of course, we're a global business, so where we are operating throughout the world, and our exciting projects and our customers are also outlined there.
Awesome. Well, Jannet, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure getting to know you.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Kidways podcast is a project of The Overhead Wire and posted first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our wonderful Patreon supporters for sponsoring this show and Mondays at The Overhead Wire. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/TheOverheadWire. You can sign up for our 15-year-old newsletter at TheOverheadWire.com. And you can listen to the show on your podcatcher of choice, including Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. And if you can't find it there, you can always find it its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Kidways.